The blood seeping through Rose Brennan's worn dress had long since dried into a stiff, rust-colored patch by the time her trembling legs finally gave out on the wooden porch of the ranch house. Her last conscious thought being that at least she had made it somewhere, before collapsing into the merciful darkness that had been chasing her for the past 3 days. Benjamin Quinn had been in the barn checking on a mare about to foal when he heard the thud against his front door, a sound too heavy to be the wind but too soft to be an intruder with ill intent. He grabbed his rifle out of habit, moving quickly across the dusty yard of his Arizona Territory ranch just outside Springerville. The late afternoon sun of June 1878 casting long shadows across the land he had worked so hard to build into something resembling a home. What he found on his porch made him drop the rifle without a second thought. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair matted with sweat and dust, her face pale beneath the grime of hard travel. Her dress, which might have once been a respectable gray cotton, was torn at the hem and stained with what looked like blood, though he could not immediately tell if it was hers. Her hands were scraped raw, fingernails broken, and her lips were cracked from dehydration. But it was the desperate, exhausted look frozen on her unconscious face that made something in his chest tighten. Benjamin dropped to one knee, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. Her pulse was weak but steady. He looked around quickly, scanning the horizon for any sign of who might have done this or who might be following her, but the land stretched empty in all directions, just the way he liked it, or had liked it, until this moment when that isolation suddenly felt more dangerous than peaceful. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was, as though she had not eaten properly in weeks. She did not stir as he carried her inside, kicking the door closed behind them. His home was simple but clean, a one-room cabin he had built himself with a loft for sleeping and a stone fireplace that kept the worst of the winter cold at bay. He laid her on his bed, the only real piece of furniture he owned besides the table and chairs, and immediately went to fetch water and clean cloth. As he carefully cleaned the dirt from her face, she stirred slightly, a small sound of distress escaping her cracked lips. "Easy now," he said softly, his voice rougher than he intended after days of speaking to no one but his horses. "You are safe here." Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. He continued his work, discovering that the blood on her dress came from a gash on her side that had already begun to heal, probably a few days old. Someone had stitched it roughly, the work of an amateur but good enough to keep her from bleeding out. He also found bruises on her wrists, like someone had gripped her too tightly, and a fading mark on her cheek that made his jaw clench with anger he had no right to feel for a stranger. Benjamin had learned field medicine during his time as a cavalry scout, before he had grown disillusioned with the Army's treatment of the Apache and the settlers alike, before he had decided that the only way to maintain his sanity and his conscience was to stake a claim far enough from town that he could mind his own business. He cleaned her wounds with practiced efficiency, noting that she would need water and food when she woke, if she woke. The exhaustion he saw in the lines of her face suggested she had pushed herself far beyond what the human body was meant to endure. He sat back in his chair, studying her in the fading light. She had a fine-boned face, the kind that spoke of gentler upbringing than the hardscrabble frontier usually allowed. Her hands, though scraped and raw now, had the long fingers of someone who might have played piano or done fine needlework. What was a woman like this doing out here, alone and running from something or someone? Night fell, and Benjamin lit a lamp, keeping it low. He heated broth from the rabbit he had caught that morning, knowing she would need something gentle on her stomach. Every few minutes, he checked her pulse and breathing, relieved each time to find them growing stronger rather than weaker. Around midnight, her eyes finally opened. She gasped, jerking upright with a speed that suggested panic, and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her side. Benjamin moved quickly, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Easy, miss. You are safe. You collapsed on my porch. I brought you inside." Her eyes, he noticed, were a striking green, and they darted around the room with the wariness of a hunted animal. "Where am I?" "My ranch, about 5 miles outside Springerville, Arizona territory. Name is Benjamin Quinn. You have been unconscious for about 6 hours." He kept his voice calm, steady, the way he would with a spooked horse. "I cleaned your wounds and got some water in you, but you need to drink more and eat something if you can manage it." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her trying to assess whether he was a threat. He stayed where he was, letting her look her fill. He knew what she would see. A man of 27 with sun-weathered skin, dark brown hair that needed cutting, and blue eyes that had seen more than he cared to remember. He was tall and lean, built by hard work rather than excess, and he wore the simple clothes of a rancher, nothing threatening about him except the fact that he was a man and she was clearly running from one. "I need to keep moving," she said finally, trying to swing her legs off the bed. She made it about halfway before the room started spinning and Benjamin caught her before she could fall. "You are not moving anywhere tonight," he said firmly, easing her back down. "You are half-starved and dehydrated. Another day of hard travel would likely kill you. Whatever you are running from, it cannot be worth dying over." Her laugh was bitter, almost breaking. "You do not know what I am running from. Then tell me." She looked at him again, that assessing gaze, and he saw the exact moment she decided he was not worth trusting. It stung more than it should have. "I cannot involve you. It is better if I just go. In the morning, if you still want to leave, I will not stop you," Benjamin said, backing away to give her space. "But right now, you need rest and food. Let me at least give you that much." He saw the fight drain out of her, exhaustion winning over fear. She nodded slowly, and he brought her the broth, helping her sit up enough to sip it without choking. She drank it carefully, her hands shaking as she held the cup. When she finished, he gave her water, watching as she drank that too with the desperation of someone who had gone far too long without. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyelids already drooping. "Rest," he said. "We can talk in the morning." She was asleep again within minutes, and Benjamin settled into his chair by the fire, his rifle across his lap. He told himself he was just being cautious, that anyone who showed up at his door in her condition was likely being followed. But the truth was something else entirely, something he was not quite ready to examine. There was something about her that had struck him the moment he saw her collapsed on his porch, something that made him want to stand between her and whatever had put that haunted look in her eyes. He dozed fitfully through the night, waking at every small sound. She slept deeply, the sleep of someone whose body had finally given up fighting. When dawn broke through his single window, painting the room in soft gold, Benjamin stood and stretched, his back protesting the night in the chair. He needed to check on the mare and do his morning chores, but he was hesitant to leave her alone, even for an hour. The decision was made for him when her eyes opened, clearer now than they had been in the dark. She looked around the room again, taking in details she had missed before. The simple but well-made furniture, the neat stack of books on a small shelf, the rifle by the door, the cooking pot hanging in the fireplace. Her gaze came back to him, and he saw less fear this time, replaced by cautious curiosity. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I was dragged behind a horse for 3 days," she said, her voice hoarse but stronger. "But better than yesterday." He smiled slightly. "Can you eat something more substantial? Eggs, maybe some bread." Her stomach answered for her, growling loudly enough that color rose in her pale cheeks. "Yes, please. If it is not too much trouble, no trouble." He moved to the stove, cracking eggs into a pan and slicing bread from the loaf he had baked 2 days ago. As he cooked, he could feel her watching him, and he wondered what she was thinking. When the food was ready, he brought it to her on a plate, along with more water. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, as though her body had suddenly remembered it needed fuel to survive. He sat at the table, drinking coffee and giving her space to eat without feeling watched. When she finally set the plate aside, empty, she looked at him with something that might have been gratitude or might have been resignation. "My name is Rose," she said. "Rose Brennan. Pleased to meet you, Miss Brennan, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Just Rose, please." She took a breath, and he could see her wrestling with how much to tell him. "I came from New Mexico Territory. I was engaged to be married to a man named Charles Whitmore. He owns a large ranch near Las Cruces, very wealthy, very well connected." She paused, and Benjamin waited, not pushing. "He was not the man I thought he was," she continued, her voice dropping. "Before the wedding, I discovered he had killed his first wife, made it look like an accident, a fall from a horse, but I found letters she had written to her sister, hidden in his study. She was afraid of him. She knew he was going to kill her, and she did. And then he did." Benjamin felt cold fury settle in his gut. "Did you go to the law?" Rose's laugh was bitter again. "Charles is the law in that county, the sheriff is his cousin, the judge is in his pocket. I went to them anyway, and Charles convinced them I was having hysterics, that I was nervous about the wedding and imagining things. Then he told me privately that if I tried to leave him or tell anyone else, he would make sure I had an accident too. So you ran." "I stole a horse and what money I could find and rode north. I thought if I could make it to another territory, maybe I could find someone who would listen, but he sent men after me." She touched the healing wound on her side. "They caught up to me 3 days ago. I fought, managed to get away, but not before one of them got me with a knife. I have been riding ever since, trying to stay ahead of them." Benjamin set his coffee cup down carefully, his mind working through the implications. "You need to keep moving then. They will be tracking you, I know." She looked down at her hands. "I should not have come here. I am putting you in danger just by being here. As soon as I can stand without falling over, I will go." "Where?" The question came out sharper than he intended. "How far do you think you will get in your condition?" "Another day, maybe 2, before they catch you again. And this time they will not just give you a knife wound and let you escape." She flinched at the truth in his words. "What else can I do?" Benjamin stood, pacing to the window and back, thinking. He had left the world of other people's troubles behind when he left the cavalry. He had built this ranch specifically to be alone, to not have to care about the injustices and violence that seemed to follow civilization wherever it went. But looking at Rose, seeing the fear and desperation she was trying so hard to hide, he knew he could not just send her back out there to die. "You stay here," he said finally, "at least until you are healed enough to travel safely. We tell anyone who asks that you are my wife, visiting from back east. This ranch is remote enough that not many people come by, and the ones who do would not think twice about it." Rose stared at him. "Why would you do that? You do not know me. This is not your fight." "Maybe I am tired of running from fights that matter." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. "Maybe I am tired of being alone out here, pretending that the rest of the world does not exist. Or maybe I just cannot stomach the thought of sending you back out there to die when I could help." She looked like she might cry, and he busied himself refilling his coffee to give her a moment to compose herself. When he looked back, she had that careful control back in place, but her eyes were suspiciously bright. I do not know how I could ever repay you, she said quietly. I am not asking for repayment. I am offering help. He sat back down, meeting her gaze steadily. But you need to be honest with me. Is there anything else I should know? Anyone else who might come looking? Rose thought for a moment, then shook her head. My parents are dead. I have a brother, but he moved to California 3 years ago and we have not spoken since. Charles isolated me from what few friends I had in Las Cruces. There is no one else. The loneliness in those words made Benjamin's chest ache. He knew that feeling too well, that sense of being utterly alone in the world. All right then. Here is what we do. You rest today, build your strength back up. Tomorrow, if you are feeling better, I will take you into Springerville and we will get you some proper clothes and supplies. We tell people you are my wife, and that means acting like it in public. Can you do that? I can try. Good enough. He stood, gathering the dishes. I have work to do outside, animals to tend. You should rest more. There are books on the shelf if you get bored, and help yourself to whatever food you want. Door locks from the inside if it makes you feel safer. He left before she could respond, needing the space to think. Outside, the morning was warming quickly, the way it always did in Arizona territory in June. He went to the barn first, checking on the pregnant mare. She was restless, pacing her stall, and he knew it would not be long now. He mucked out the stalls and fed all the horses, 4 in total, including the one Rose must have ridden in on. It was standing in the small corral, a decent-looking chestnut gelding with the brand of a New Mexico ranch on its hip. Proof of her story, if he had needed it. As he worked, Benjamin tried to untangle the knot of feelings in his chest. He had meant what he said about being tired of running from fights that mattered. But there was more to it than that, something he was almost afraid to examine too closely. In the few hours he had known Rose Brennan, something had shifted in him, some long, dormant part of his heart waking up and taking notice. It was foolish and dangerous, and he knew it, but he could not seem to help it. He spent the morning repairing a section of fence, hard physical work that usually cleared his mind. Today it just gave him too much time to think. About Rose, asleep in his bed, about the men who were hunting her, about what it would mean to stand against a man like Charles Whitmore, who apparently had enough money and influence to control an entire county. The smart thing would be to send her on her way, maybe give her some supplies and wish her luck. The smart thing would be to protect himself, protect the quiet life he had built here. But Benjamin had not always done the smart thing, and he was not about to start now, not when it meant abandoning someone who needed help. When he came back to the house around noon, he found Rose awake and standing by the window, though she was leaning heavily on the sill for support. She had found a blanket to wrap around herself, and her hair, though still tangled, looked like she had tried to finger comb it into some kind of order. You should be resting, he said, setting down the pail of milk he had gotten from his cow. I have been resting. I needed to move a little. She turned to look at him, and he saw that some color had returned to her cheeks. I wanted to thank you again, for all of this. I know you are taking a risk. We both are. He poured milk into a cup and handed it to her. Drink this. You need to build your strength back. She took it obediently, sipping slowly. Tell me about yourself. If I am going to be pretending to be your wife, I should probably know something about you. Benjamin leaned against the table, considering how much to tell her. Not much to tell. I grew up in Texas, joined the cavalry when I was 18. Spent 5 years as a scout, mostly in Arizona and New Mexico territories. Got tired of watching good people get hurt by men with power and no conscience, so I left, came out here and staked a claim on this land. That was 3 years ago. Been ranching ever since, mostly keeping to myself. No family. Parents died when I was young. No siblings. No wife, obviously, or this arrangement would not work. He smiled slightly. What about you? What was your life like before Charles Whitmore? Rose's expression grew distant. My father was a school teacher. We lived in Santa Fe until I was 15, then moved to Las Cruces when he got a position at a new school there. My mother died of fever 2 years later, and my father followed her a year after that. I think he died of a broken heart more than anything else. She paused, staring into her milk. I was working as a seamstress when I met Charles. He was charming, attentive, everything a young woman dreams of. I thought I was so lucky that a man like him would want to marry someone like me. The bitterness in her voice made Benjamin want to find Charles Whitmore and show him what happened to men who hurt women. You were lucky, he said quietly. Lucky that you found out the truth before it was too late. She looked up at him, startled. I never thought of it that way. You should. You are alive and you are free of him. That is more than his first wife got. Rose nodded slowly, something like hope flickering in her eyes. You are right. I should focus on that. They ate lunch together, a simple meal of bread and cheese and cold chicken, and Benjamin found himself enjoying the conversation more than he had expected. Rose was intelligent and well-read, and they discovered a shared love of poetry and adventure stories. For a little while, it was almost possible to forget the danger hanging over them, to pretend this was just a normal day with a normal guest. That afternoon, he showed her around the ranch, walking slowly so she could keep up without exhausting herself. She admired his horses, his small vegetable garden, the chicken coop, and the sturdy barn he had built with his own hands. You have made a good life here, she said, shading her eyes against the sun. It must be peaceful. It was, he said, then immediately regretted the past tense. It is, he corrected, but they both knew what he had meant. That night, Benjamin insisted Rose take the bed again while he slept on a bedroll on the floor. She protested, but he would not hear of it. You are still recovering. Besides, I have slept in worse places than my own floor. As he lay in the darkness, listening to her quiet breathing from the bed above, Benjamin wondered what he had gotten himself into. Wondered if Charles Whitmore's men were getting closer, if they would arrive tomorrow or the next day or next week. Wondered what he would do when they did. And underneath all of that, he wondered about the strange feeling that had settled in his chest, warm and frightening all at once, whenever he looked at the woman sleeping in his bed. The next morning, Rose woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She sat up carefully, pleased to find that her side only twinged a little instead of the sharp pain of the previous days. Benjamin was at the stove, his back to her, and she took a moment to study him in the morning light. He was not what she had expected when she had regained consciousness in a stranger's home. He was gentle but competent, kind but not soft. There was a hardness to him that spoke of difficult experiences, but it had not made him cruel the way it had made Charles cruel. She had seen the way his hands moved with sure confidence, whether he was cooking or tending to her wounds or handling his horses. She had seen the intelligence in his blue eyes when they discussed books and ideas. And she had seen something else, something that made her heart beat a little faster whenever he looked at her with that particular intensity she was only beginning to recognize. It was too soon, she told herself. Too dangerous to let herself feel anything for this man who had saved her life. She needed to focus on staying alive, on getting far enough away that Charles could never find her. She could not afford to be distracted by a handsome cowboy with kind eyes and a gentle touch, but her heart, it seemed, had not gotten that message. "Good morning," Benjamin said, turning and catching her watching him. "How do you feel?" "Better," she said honestly. "Much better." "Good, because if you are up for it, I think we should go into Springerville today. Get you some proper clothes and supplies. Let people see you so the story about you being my wife starts to spread. The more people who believe it, the safer you will be." Rose nodded, understanding the logic even as her stomach twisted with anxiety. What if someone recognizes me? What if word gets back to Charles? You are far enough from New Mexico that it is unlikely anyone here would know you. And we will say you are from Texas, where I grew up. That should explain any accent differences. He brought her a plate of food. "But if you are not ready, we can wait another day." "No," Rose said, taking the plate. "You are right. The sooner we establish the story, the better." After breakfast, Benjamin went out to hitch up his wagon while Rose did her best to make herself presentable. She washed in the basin of water he had left for her, combing through her tangled hair with her fingers until it was smooth enough to braid. Her dress was beyond saving, the tears and stains too much to repair, but it would have to do until they reached town. The ride into Springerville took about an hour, the wagon jolting over the rough road. Benjamin kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her about the town and the people she might meet, preparing her for the role she would need to play. The general store is run by a man named Thomas Fletcher and his wife Margaret. They are good people, a bit nosy but harmless. There is a doctor, Samuel Harrison, and a sheriff named William Grant. The hotel and saloon are both owned by the same man, George Peterson. Rose listened carefully, committing the names to memory. What if they ask questions about how we met? We keep it simple. "We met in Texas 3 years ago, courted through letters while I was establishing the ranch, and you finally came out to join me last month. You have been at the ranch since then, which is why no one has seen you yet." "Last month, but I look like I just arrived yesterday." "You were thrown from a horse a few days ago, which is why you are bruised and moving carefully." That is close enough to the truth that you should not have trouble keeping the story straight. Rose nodded, impressed by how quickly he had constructed a believable narrative. "You have done this before. Lied to cover someone's tracks." He glanced at her. "A few times during my cavalry days. Usually helping settlers who had defended themselves against raiders and did not want the army asking too many questions about how they got their weapons. You bent the rules. I broke them when they deserved to be broken." His jaw tightened. "I saw too many good people punished for surviving, too many bad men protected because they had money or connections. Made me realize the rules were not always right." Something in his voice made Rose look at him more closely. "Is that why you left the cavalry? Part of it?" He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "There was an Apache village, mostly women and children because the men were away hunting. Some soldiers decided to raid it, killed most of them, took the survivors as prisoners. I reported it, testified against the soldiers involved. Know what happened?" "Nothing. The soldiers got reassigned. The Apache who survived were sent to a reservation, and I got told to keep my mouth shut if I wanted to keep my position. So you left." "So I left. Decided if I could not change the system, I would at least not be part of it anymore." He looked at her, his expression serious. "That is why I am helping you, Rose, because I am done watching bad men win." Her throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. Springerville was a small town, perhaps 24 buildings clustered along a single main street. Benjamin pulled the wagon up in front of the general store, a neat wooden building with a false front and large windows displaying goods. He helped Rose down, his hands steady on her waist, and she tried not to notice how warm they felt through her dress. Inside, the store smelled of coffee and leather and soap. A middle-aged woman behind the counter looked up with a bright smile that froze when she saw Rose's disheveled appearance. "Benjamin Quinn, is that you? We have not seen you in town for near a month." "Mrs. Fletcher," Benjamin said with a nod. "I want you to meet my wife, Rose. She arrived from Texas about a month back." Margaret Fletcher's eyes went wide. "Your wife? Benjamin, you sly dog, you never mentioned you were married or getting married." "It is fairly recent," Benjamin said, his hand moving to the small of Rose's back in a gesture that looked perfectly natural. "We have been keeping to ourselves at the ranch, getting settled. But Rose took a fall from a horse a few days back, so I thought we should come into town for some proper supplies to tend to her." Margaret's expression shifted immediately to concern. "Oh, you poor dear. Are you all right? Should we fetch Doc Harrison?" "I am fine," Rose said, finding her voice. "Just some bruises and scrapes, but I am afraid my dresses did not fare so well in the fall. I was hoping you might have something that would fit, of course. Let me show you what we have." Margaret came around the counter, already measuring Rose with her eyes. "You are about the same size as my niece. I think we have a few things that would work nicely." For the next hour, Margaret fussed over Rose, pulling out dresses and undergarments and other necessities. Rose found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Margaret was kind and warm, and she did not seem to suspect anything was amiss. She chattered about town gossip, about who was courting whom and who had bought what land, and slowly Rose started to feel like maybe this could work. Maybe they could pull off this deception long enough for her to heal and figure out what to do next. Benjamin waited patiently, occasionally offering opinions on what colors looked nice, playing the role of attentive husband with an ease that surprised Rose. When they finally had everything they needed, he paid without blinking at the cost, and Margaret promised to tell everyone about Benjamin's new bride. "You will have to come to church on Sunday," Margaret said as they were leaving. "Everyone will want to meet her properly." "We will see," Benjamin said noncommittally. "Rose is still recovering." Of course. But soon, yes. It is so lovely that you have someone now, Benjamin. You have been alone out there too long." As they loaded the packages into the wagon, Rose glanced at Benjamin. "Church on Sunday." "We will decide later," he said. "For now, let us just get you home." Home. The word sent a strange thrill through her. She had not had a real home since her father died, had been living in a rented room in Las Cruces, and then as a guest in Charles's house, which had never felt like home even before she discovered the truth about him. But something about the way Benjamin said it, casual and certain, made her feel like maybe his ranch could be a home, at least for a little while. They made one more stop at the doctor's office, where Benjamin insisted Doc Harrison look at Rose's side. The doctor, a thin man in his 50s with gentle hands, examined the wound and pronounced the stitching adequate but the care good. "Another week and it should be well healed," he said. "Just keep it clean and do not overdo physical activity." He too seemed delighted by the news of Benjamin's marriage, and Rose found herself answering questions about Texas with details Benjamin had coached her on during the ride. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, but she understood the necessity. Every person who believed the story was one more layer of protection between her and Charles. By the time they headed back to the ranch, it was late afternoon. Rose leaned against Benjamin's shoulder, too tired to worry about propriety, and he did not seem to mind. "You did well today," he said quietly. "I know that was not easy." "It was not as hard as I thought it would be," she admitted. "Margaret and the doctor were so kind. It made me feel less like I was lying and more like I was just protecting myself." "You are protecting yourself." "Nothing wrong with that." Back at the ranch, they unloaded the packages, and Rose immediately changed into one of her new dresses, a simple blue calico that fit much better than her ruined gray one. She braided her hair properly and looked at herself in the small mirror Benjamin had on the wall. She looked almost normal, she thought. almost like a woman who had not been running for her life just days ago. That night, they sat together after dinner, and Benjamin read aloud from one of his books, a collection of Shakespeare's plays. His voice was surprisingly good for reading, expressive and clear, and Rose found herself drawn into the stories. When he finally closed the book, it was late, and she realized she had not thought about Charles or the danger once in the past 2 hours. "Thank you," she said. "For today, for the reading, for all of it." Benjamin looked at her in the lamplight, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You do not have to keep thanking me, Rose." "Yes, I do. Because what you are doing, it is not something most people would do for a stranger. You are not a stranger anymore." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Rose went to bed that night with her heart full of confusing emotions. She barely knew this man, had only met him 2 days ago, but already she felt safer with him than she had felt in years. Already she found herself looking forward to seeing him each morning, to their conversations, to the quiet companionship that had sprung up between them. It was dangerous, she knew. She could not afford to let herself care too much, not when she might have to run again at any moment. But lying in Benjamin's bed, wearing one of her new nightgowns and listening to him breathe steadily from his bedroll on the floor, Rose allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if this were real. If she really were his wife, if this ranch really were her home, if that look in his eyes meant what she thought it might mean, in the morning, she would be sensible again. She would remember the danger, remember that she was just passing through, remember that she could not ask Benjamin to risk more than he already had. But tonight, she let herself imagine and fell asleep with a smile on her face. The next few days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Benjamin taught Rose how to care for the chickens and milk the cow, how to tend the vegetable garden and feed the horses. She proved to be a quick learner, and he found himself impressed by her determination to be useful. She cooked meals that were better than anything he had made for himself in 3 years of solitary living, and she mended his clothes with the skill of a professional seamstress. They talked constantly, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, their opinions on everything from politics to poetry. Benjamin found himself laughing more than he had in years, found himself looking forward to the end of each day when they would sit by the fire and read or just talk. And he found himself noticing things he had no right to notice. The way Rose's hair caught the lamplight, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the way her hand felt in his when he helped her over rough ground. He was falling in love with her. He realized one morning as he watched her scatter grain for the chickens, her face turned up to the sun. It was foolish and dangerous and probably hopeless, but he could not seem to help it. She had taken over his home and his heart with equal ease, and he had no idea what to do about it. The problem was that he had no idea if she felt the same way. She was kind to him, certainly, and seemed to enjoy his company. But was that just gratitude? Was she simply being pleasant to the man who had saved her life? And even if she did care for him, was it fair to tell her when she was still healing, still dependent on him, still technically engaged to another man? Benjamin had never been good with matters of the heart. He had courted a few girls when he was younger, but nothing had ever come of it, and his years as a cavalry scout had not exactly provided opportunities for romance. Now, at 27, he found himself in love for the first time in his life and had no idea how to handle it. Rose, for her part, was having similar thoughts. She caught herself watching Benjamin more often than she should, admiring the way he moved, the confidence in his hands, the kindness in his eyes. She found herself making excuses to be near him, to touch his arm when she laughed at his jokes, to stand close enough that their shoulders brushed when they looked at his books together. She knew it was wrong to feel this way so soon. Charles had proposed after 6 months of courtship, and she had thought that was rushing things. Now here she was, having known Benjamin for less than a week, and already she felt more for him than she had ever felt for Charles. Already she could imagine a life here, on this ranch with this man. But she could not say anything. She was lying to him every day, pretending to be his wife in public when really she was just a burden he had taken on out of kindness. And she was putting him in danger simply by being here. What right did she have to complicate things further by confessing feelings he might not return on Sunday? They went to church in Springerville. Rose wore her best new dress, a dark green that brought out her eyes, and Benjamin wore his cleanest shirt and vest. They sat together in a pew near the back, and Rose was acutely aware of his arm pressed against hers, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back when they stood to sing. After the service, they were immediately surrounded by curious townspeople, all wanting to meet Benjamin's mysterious wife. Rose smiled until her face hurt, answering the same questions over and over. Yes, they had met in Texas, yes. She loved Arizona territory, yes. She was recovering well from her fall, yes. They were very happy. An older woman named Judith Pemberton cornered Rose while Benjamin was talking to some of the ranchers. "You are a lucky woman," Judith said, her eyes twinkling. "Benjamin Quinn is one of the best men in this territory, had half the unmarried women around here hoping to catch his eye." "I am very lucky," Rose said, and meant it more than Judith could know. "He is lucky too, dear. I can see it in the way he looks at you. That man is head over heels." Rose felt her cheeks heat. "You think so?" "Oh, I know so. I have been married 40 years. I know what love looks like." Judith patted her arm. "You just make sure you take care of each other, especially out there all alone on that ranch." As they drove home, Rose thought about Judith's words. Did Benjamin look at her like he was in love? She had not noticed, but then again, she had been trying so hard not to let her own feelings show that she might have missed the signs. "That was exhausting," Benjamin said, breaking into her thoughts. "I forgot how much small towns love to gossip. Everyone seemed very happy for us." "For me, you mean? Apparently I have been alone too long and everyone was worried." He glanced at her with a slight smile. "You were very convincing today. If I did not know better, I would have believed you really were my wife." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "If you did not know better," he was quiet for a long moment. "Rose, I need to ask you something and I want you to be honest with me." Her heart started to pound. "All right. How long are you planning to stay?" "I mean, I told you that you could stay until you were healed, and you are pretty much healed now. So, are you thinking about moving on? Heading further west, maybe California where your brother is?" Rose had not let herself think about it, but now that he was asking, she realized she did not want to leave. She did not want to go to California, did not want to leave this ranch or this man. But she also did not want to overstay her welcome, did not want to be a burden. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I have not thought that far ahead. Do you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out fast and emphatic. "No, Rose, that is not what I am saying at all. I just want to know what you are thinking, what you are planning, so I can plan too." "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Benjamin pulled the wagon to a stop, right there in the middle of the road, and turned to face her. "I want you to stay," he said, his blue eyes intense. "I want you to stay for as long as you want to be here. Forever if you will have it. But I need to know if that is even something you might want, because if it is not, I need to stop myself from hoping." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes. "You want me to stay? Rose, I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since the moment I found you on my porch. And I know it is too fast and too complicated, and you probably do not feel the same way, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel it. I cannot keep lying to you when we are asking you to lie to everyone else. You are falling in love with me. She could barely believe what she was hearing. I am. And if that makes things uncomfortable, I understand. We can go back to how things were, just friends and nothing more, but I needed you to know. Rose started to laugh, tears streaming down her face. You foolish man. I am falling in love with you too. I have been trying so hard not to because I thought it was just gratitude or just fear or just me being damaged from Charles. But it is not any of those things. It is real. Benjamin's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, hope, joy. You mean it. I mean it. She reached out and cupped his face in her hands. I love you, Benjamin Quinn, and I want to stay. I want this to be real, not just a story we tell people. I want to be your wife. He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that made her heart soar. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. We will have to get actually married, he said. I am not going to compromise you by having you live with me without making an honest woman of you. Is that a proposal, Mr. Quinn? It is, Miss Brennan. Rose, will you marry me, for real this time? Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. They kissed again, longer this time, and Rose felt like she was finally, truly home. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning. They decided to get married quickly and quietly, partly because they did not want to wait and partly because the longer they went on pretending to already be married while not actually being married, the more complicated things would get. Benjamin rode into town and spoke to the preacher, a kind man named Reverend Thomas, who agreed to perform a simple ceremony at the church the following Saturday. Rose spent the week preparing, altering one of her new dresses to serve as a wedding dress, and cooking a feast for the small celebration they planned to have. Benjamin invited a few people, Margaret and Thomas Fletcher, Doc Harrison, and a couple of neighboring ranchers he was friendly with. Rose found herself genuinely excited, not nervous like she had been before her almost wedding to Charles. The night before the wedding, they sat together by the fire, and Benjamin brought up something they had been avoiding. We need to talk about Charles Whitmore. Rose felt her stomach clench. I know, I have been trying not to think about him. Neither have I, but we need to. It has been almost 2 weeks since you arrived here. If his men are still looking for you, they could be getting close. And once we are married, you will be legally my wife, which means he has no claim on you. But that does not mean he will not try something. What do you think we should do? Benjamin leaned forward, his expression serious. I think we should write to the territorial marshal in Prescott, tell him the whole story about Charles and his first wife. It might not result in anything immediately, but it gets the information on record. And if Charles does try something, there will be evidence that we warned the authorities. Rose nodded slowly. That makes sense. But Charles is smart. He covered his tracks well with his first wife. I do not know if my testimony alone will be enough. Maybe not, but it is a start. He took her hand. Rose, I am not going to let him hurt you, I promise you that. Whatever comes, we face it together. Together, she repeated, liking the sound of it. They wrote the letter that night, with Rose carefully detailing everything she had discovered about the death of Charles's first wife, whose name had been Elizabeth Whitmore, and the threats Charles had made when she tried to expose him. Benjamin added his own testimony as a witness to Rose's condition when she arrived at his ranch, and they signed it together. He would mail it from Springerville the next morning, before the wedding. Rose slept fitfully that night, her dreams a confused mix of wedding celebrations and men with knives chasing her through endless desert. She woke before dawn to find Benjamin already up, making coffee in the pre-dawn darkness. Could not sleep either, she asked. He shook his head. Too much on my mind, but good things mostly. Today I get to marry the woman I love. That is worth losing a little sleep over." She smiled, moving to stand beside him. "I love you, Benjamin." "I love you too, Rose." He kissed her forehead. "By this time tomorrow you will be Rose Quinn." "Rose Quinn," she repeated, testing the name. "I like the sound of that." They rode into Springerville mid-morning, the wagon loaded with food for the celebration. Margaret Fletcher had volunteered to help set up the church, and she greeted them with barely contained excitement. "Oh, Rose, you look beautiful. That dress is perfect." Rose had altered a simple cream-colored dress with lace she had purchased, and she had to admit she was pleased with the result. She had twisted her hair up in a simple but elegant style, and Benjamin had given her a ribbon of blue silk to weave through it. Something borrowed from his mother, he had said, one of the few things he had kept from his childhood. The ceremony was short and sweet, with only their small group of friends in attendance. Benjamin spoke his vows in a clear, strong voice that made Rose's heart swell. When it was her turn, she looked into his blue eyes and promised to love him, honor him, and stay by his side for as long as they both lived. And when Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, Benjamin's kiss was tender and full of promise. Afterward, they shared the meal Rose had prepared, and their friends toasted their happiness with apple cider from the Fletcher's orchard. Doc Harrison told embarrassing stories about treating Benjamin for various ranch accidents over the years, and Margaret insisted on giving Rose advice about married life that made everyone laugh. As the sun set, and their friends began to head home, Rose and Benjamin climbed back into their wagon. "Mrs. Quinn," Benjamin said, helping her up. "How does it feel to be married?" "Perfect," she said simply. "It feels perfect." They drove home in comfortable silence, Rose leaning against Benjamin's shoulder, his arm around her waist. The ranch looked beautiful in the twilight, and Rose felt a swell of emotion looking at it. This was her home now, truly and legally. She was Rose Quinn, wife of Benjamin Quinn, and no one could take that from her. That night, as they lay together in the bed that was now truly theirs, Benjamin held Rose close and whispered promises of the future. They would build this ranch together, maybe add some more buildings, expand the herd. They would have children someday, if they were blessed with them. They would grow old together on this land they both loved. Rose fell asleep in her husband's arms, happier than she had ever been in her life. The weeks that followed were blissful. Rose threw herself into making the ranch a proper home, planting flowers by the door and sewing curtains for the windows. Benjamin started working on adding a second room to the cabin, wanting to give them more space. They worked side by side every day and fell asleep tangled together every night. The reply from the territorial marshal came 6 weeks after their wedding. It was brief, but encouraging. The marshal said he would look into the matter of Elizabeth Whitmore's death and contact the authorities in New Mexico Territory. He thanked them for bringing the matter to his attention and assured them that if Charles Whitmore attempted to harm or harass Rose, the full weight of territorial law would come down on him. It was not a guarantee of safety, but it was something. Rose felt lighter after reading it, as though some weight she had been carrying had finally been lifted. Maybe, she thought, they really would be all right. Maybe Charles would realize she was protected now and leave her alone. She should have known better than to hope it would be that easy. It was an October morning, crisp and clear, when 3 men rode up to the ranch. Benjamin was in the barn, and Rose was hanging laundry, enjoying the cool air after the brutal heat of summer. She heard the horses before she saw them, and something about the purposeful way they were riding made her stomach drop. She knew, even before they reined in at the fence, who had sent them. The lead rider was a hard-looking man in his 40s, with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes like chips of ice. "You Rose Brennan?" he asked. Rose's mouth went dry. "My name is Rose Quinn." "That is not what Mr. Whitmore says. He says you are his runaway fiancé, and he wants you back." Benjamin emerged from the barn, his rifle in his hands. "The lady is my wife, legally married for the past 2 months. Whatever claim Charles Whitmore thought he had on her is void." The scarred man looked at Benjamin without concern. "Mr. Whitmore does not see it that way. He thinks the lady was confused, made some bad decisions. He is willing to forgive her if she comes back peacefully." "I am not going anywhere," Rose said, moving to stand beside Benjamin. "I am married. I am home. You can tell Charles that he has no power over me anymore." One of the other men laughed, a cruel sound. "You think getting married to some nobody rancher protects you? Mr. Whitmore owns half of New Mexico territory. He can make you disappear, and no one will ask questions." "This is Arizona territory," Benjamin said, his voice cold. "And you are trespassing on my land. You have about 10 seconds to turn those horses around and ride away before I start shooting." The scarred man's hand moved toward his gun, but he stopped when Benjamin raised the rifle to his shoulder. "You really want to die for a woman who was willing to run out on her engagement?" "I am willing to die for my wife," Benjamin said. "Are you willing to die for Charles Whitmore's wounded pride?" For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the scarred man spat in the dirt. "This is not over. Mr. Whitmore does not give up what is his." "I was never his," Rose said firmly, "and I never will be." The 3 men wheeled their horses and rode away, but Rose knew this was not the end. She turned to Benjamin, her hands shaking. "He is not going to stop. I know." Benjamin lowered the rifle, his jaw tight. "But we are not helpless. We have friends in town, and we have the law on our side now. He cannot just take you. He killed his first wife and got away with it. What makes you think he cannot get away with killing me?" Benjamin pulled her close, his arms strong and reassuring around her. "Because you have me now, and I am not going to let anything happen to you." They rode into Springerville that afternoon and spoke to Sheriff Grant, a solid man in his 50s who took their story seriously. He promised to keep an eye out for the 3 men and to telegraph the territorial marshal about the harassment. He also suggested that Benjamin might want to deputize some of the local ranchers, form a sort of informal watch to make sure Charles's men did not try anything. Over the next few days, Benjamin did exactly that. He rode to each of his neighbors, explained the situation, and asked for their help. To his relief, every single one agreed. They organized a rotation of men who would check on the Quinn ranch daily, and they all agreed to come running if they heard gunfire or saw anything suspicious. Rose was touched by how many people were willing to help them, people who barely knew her but trusted Benjamin's word that she needed protection. It made her realize that Benjamin had built more than just a ranch out here. He had built a community, whether he had intended to or not. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The watch rotated, men stopping by every day to check in, and life slowly returned to normal. Rose began to hope that maybe Charles had given up, that maybe the show of force had been enough to convince him she was not worth the trouble. Then on a cold November night, Benjamin smelled smoke. He bolted upright in bed, his heart pounding. "Rose, wake up. The barn is on fire." They scrambled out of bed and outside, and sure enough, flames were licking up the side of the barn. The horses were screaming in terror. Benjamin ran toward the barn, and Rose ran for the bell they had hung by the door, the signal to their neighbors that they needed help. As she rang the bell as hard as she could, she saw movement in the shadows beyond the firelight. 3 figures on horseback, watching. Even from this distance, she recognized the scarred man. Benjamin managed to get all the horses out of the burning barn before the roof collapsed, but there was nothing they could do to save the structure itself. They could only watch as it burned, years of work and all of Benjamin's tools going up in flames. By the time their neighbors arrived, the barn was gone and the men were too. Sheriff Grant came at first light, studying the scene and the hoofprints in the dust. "It was definitely arson," he said grimly, "and from your description it sounds like the same men who threatened you before." "What can we do?" Rose asked, her voice hollow. She felt sick with guilt. This was her fault. Benjamin had lost his barn because of her. "I can arrest them if I can find them," Grant said. "But if they are smart, they are already across the territorial line. I will send telegrams, put out word that they are wanted for arson, but it might take time to track them down." After the sheriff left, Rose stood staring at the smoking ruins of the barn, tears streaming down her face. Benjamin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It is just a barn," he said softly. "We can rebuild it. It is not just a barn, it is your livelihood. It is years of your work, and it is gone because of me. It is gone because Charles Whitmore is a vindictive man who cannot stand to lose. That is not your fault, Rose. If I had not come here, if I had just kept running, then you would probably be dead by now," Benjamin interrupted. "And I would still be alone, going through the motions of living without ever really being alive. You saved me as much as I saved you, Rose. Do not ever doubt that." She turned in his arms, burying her face in his chest. "I am so sorry. Do not be. We will get through this. We will rebuild, and we will make sure Charles Whitmore faces justice for what he has done." True to his word, Benjamin started rebuilding immediately. Their neighbors helped, donating lumber and labor. Within a month, a new barn stood where the old one had been, not as large but sturdy and functional. And while they worked, Benjamin also worked with Sheriff Grant and the territorial marshal to build a case against Charles Whitmore. The breakthrough came in December, when the territorial marshal managed to locate Elizabeth Whitmore's sister in Kansas. She still had the letters Elizabeth had written, letters that clearly detailed Charles's abuse and Elizabeth's fear for her life. With those letters and Rose's testimony, the marshal had enough to request that New Mexico Territory authorities reopen the investigation into Elizabeth's death. Charles was arrested in January of 1879, and though he tried to use his money and connections to make the charges go away, the evidence was too strong. The letters were damning, and when investigators looked more closely at Elizabeth's death, they found inconsistencies that pointed to murder rather than accident. Charles's 3 hired men, including the scarred man, were tracked down and arrested for the arson of Benjamin's barn. Under pressure, one of them confessed that Charles had ordered them to burn the barn as a warning, and that Charles had planned to eventually kill both Benjamin and Rose if they did not give in to his demands. The trial took place in March, and Rose had to testify. It was one of the hardest things she had ever done, standing up in front of a courtroom full of people and describing what she had discovered about Charles, the threats he had made, the terror she had felt fleeing from him. But Benjamin was there in the courtroom every day, his steady presence giving her strength. Charles Whitmore was found guilty of murdering his first wife and of conspiracy to commit murder against Rose and Benjamin. He was sentenced to hang. When the verdict was read, Rose felt something in her chest finally release, a tension she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. It was over. Charles could never hurt her again. She was free. That night back at their ranch, Benjamin held her while she cried, tears of relief and release and gratitude. "It is over," he whispered into her hair. "You are safe now. We are safe." "I know," she said through her tears. I know, thank you for standing by me through all of this. Thank you for not giving up. Never, he said fiercely. I will never give up on you, Rose. You are my wife, my partner, my love. We are in this together always. Spring came to Arizona territory with a burst of wildflowers and new growth. The ranch flourished under their joint care, and they added more cattle and horses to their stock. Rose planted a garden that produced more vegetables than they could eat, so she started selling the excess in Springerville. Benjamin finished adding a second room to the cabin and started planning a third, because Rose had news that made expansion necessary. She told him one evening in May as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Benjamin, I am pregnant. His eyes went wide, then filled with joy. You are sure? Doc Harrison confirmed it this morning. He says the baby should come in December around Christmas. Benjamin pulled her into his arms, laughing with delight. We are going to have a baby. Rose, we are going to have a family. Are you happy? She asked, even though she could see that he was. I am happier than I ever thought I could be. You have given me everything, Rose. A home, a family, a purpose. I love you so much. I love you too. More than words can say. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Rose bloomed with health, her earlier thinness replaced by the soft curves of impending motherhood. Benjamin was attentive and caring, never letting her do too much, always making sure she was comfortable. Their neighbors were excited for them, and Margaret Fletcher insisted on organizing a quilting bee to make blankets for the baby. The baby came on a cold December night, during a snowstorm that blanketed the ranch in white. Doc Harrison made it through the snow just in time, and after hours of labor, Rose delivered a healthy baby boy. They named him William, after Benjamin's father, and he had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Holding his son for the first time, Benjamin felt tears stream down his face. He is perfect, he whispered. Rose, he is perfect. We made him, she said, exhausted but radiant. Our son. Their family grew over the years. 2 years after William was born, they welcomed a daughter named Sarah, who had Benjamin's blue eyes and Rose's auburn hair. 3 years after that, another son named James arrived, boisterous and laughing from his first day. The cabin grew with them, rooms added on until it was a proper house, comfortable and full of life. Benjamin expanded the ranch, eventually hiring a couple of hands to help with the work as his herd grew. Rose started a small school in Springerville, teaching children to read and write the way her father had taught her. They became pillars of the community, respected and loved by everyone who knew them. But it was the quiet moments Benjamin treasured most. Evenings on the porch with Rose, watching their children play in the yard, mornings waking up with her in his arms, the look in her eyes when she told him she loved him, even after years of marriage. One night, 20 years after Rose had collapsed on his porch, Benjamin and Rose sat together watching the sunset. Their children were grown now, William married with a child of his own, Sarah engaged to a good man from town, and James working the ranch alongside his father. The years had been kind to them both, a few gray hairs and laugh lines, but still strong and healthy. You ever think about that day? Rose asked, leaning against Benjamin's shoulder. The day I showed up here, half dead and desperate? Sometimes, Benjamin admitted. I think about how different my life would be if you had not made it to my door. I would still be alone, still just going through the motions. I think about it too. I think about how close I came to giving up, how easy it would have been to just lie down in the desert and let the heat take me. But something kept me going, some instinct that told me if I could just make it a little further, I would find safety. You found me. I found home, she corrected. I found you and I found home all at the same time. Benjamin turned to look at her, this woman who had given him everything worth having. Her face was still beautiful to him, more so now because he knew every expression, every smile, every tear. "I love you, Rose Quinn. I have loved you for 20 years, and I will love you for 20 more and 20 after that. And I love you, Benjamin Quinn. My hero, my husband, my home." They sat together as the sun set on another day, another year, another chapter of their life together. And Benjamin thought about the words he had spoken that first day when he had carried her inside and laid her on his bed, words she had been too unconscious to hear, but that he had meant with his whole heart. "You are home," he had said then, and it had been true. She had been home from that very first moment, and she would be home for the rest of their lives. Years continued to pass, each one full of the joys and sorrows that make up a well-lived life. William gave them 3 grandchildren. Sarah gave them 2 more, and James eventually married a smart woman from Santa Fe who gave them 4 more. The ranch house, which had started as a simple one-room cabin, was now a sprawling homestead with multiple buildings and a thriving operation that employed half a dozen ranch hands. Benjamin and Rose watched their grandchildren grow, telling them stories of the old days, of how Grandma had arrived at the ranch and stolen Grandpa's heart. The children loved the romantic story, though Benjamin and Rose left out the darker details about Charles Whitmore and the danger Rose had been in. That was a chapter they had closed long ago, better forgotten than dwelled upon. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Their children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter, and the long table Benjamin had built years ago groaned under the weight of food. As Benjamin looked around at the faces of his family, all there because he had opened his door to a desperate woman 25 years ago, he felt his heart might burst with gratitude. That night, after everyone had gone to bed or headed home, Benjamin and Rose walked out to the small cemetery on the hill where they had buried beloved pets, and eventually, Benjamin's old horse, who had carried him through his cavalry days. They looked up at the stars, brilliant in the clear Arizona sky. "We built something good here," Rose said softly, "something that will last long after we are gone." "We did," Benjamin agreed, "and it all started with you having the courage to run, to fight, to survive." "It started with you having the kindness to help a stranger," Rose corrected. "Not many men would have done what you did, Benjamin. Not many men would have risked so much for someone they did not even know." "I knew enough," Benjamin said. "I knew you needed help, and I knew I could not live with myself if I turned you away. The rest, well, the rest was just me being selfish, wanting to keep you close." Rose laughed, the sound as beautiful to him now as it had been all those years ago. "Selfish? You, the most selfless man I have ever known. When it comes to you, I am very selfish indeed. I want all of your smiles, all of your laughter, all of your love. I want every moment I can have with you." "Then you shall have them," she said, taking his hand. "Every single one, for as long as we have." They were granted many more years together. Benjamin lived to be 78, dying peacefully in his sleep with Rose holding his hand. She followed him 2 years later at the age of 73, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. They were buried side by side on the hill they had loved, under a headstone that read, "Benjamin and Rose Quinn, together always." The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations. William's eldest son took it over, then his son after him, and so on down the line. Each generation added something new while respecting what had come before, understanding that they were stewards of a legacy built on love and courage, and the determination to do what was right even when it was dangerous. The story of how Benjamin and Rose met became family legend, passed down through the years. Great-great-grandchildren would sit on the porch of the old house, now carefully preserved and expanded, and listen to the tale of the woman who collapsed from exhaustion at the cowboy's door, and how he carried her inside and said, "You're home," and how that simple act of kindness had led to a love story that spanned decades and created a family that spread across Arizona territory and beyond. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could feel the presence of Benjamin and Rose, still watching over the ranch they had built together, still protecting the family they had created, still together just as they had promised they always would be. The ranch house itself became a sort of monument to their love. The room where Rose had first woken up after Benjamin found her was preserved exactly as it had been, with the simple bed and the small table and the books on the shelf. Future generations would stand in that room and try to imagine what it must have been like, that moment when two strangers met and changed each other's lives forever. In the town of Springerville, which had grown from a small settlement to a proper town, there was a school named after Rose Quinn, honoring her years of teaching the town's children. And there was a park named after Benjamin Quinn, honoring his service to the community and his reputation as a man who could always be counted on to help those in need. Their legacy was not just in the physical things they had built or the family they had raised, but in the example they had set. They had shown that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that courage was not just about facing down danger, but also about opening your heart to someone new, and that home was not just a place, but a person you chose to stand beside through whatever came. The Wild West that Benjamin and Rose had known gradually faded into history. Arizona Territory became a state in 1912, long after they were both gone. The frontier was tamed, the harsh landscape made manageable by irrigation and technology. But the stories remained, passed down through generations, of the days when the land was wild and dangerous, and it took a special kind of courage just to survive. And among all those stories, the story of Benjamin and Rose Quinn stood out, a reminder that even in the hardest times, love could flourish. That even when running for your life, you might run straight into the arms of your destiny. That sometimes, when everything seems lost, home is just around the corner, waiting for you to arrive. The last person who had actually known Benjamin and Rose Quinn personally was their youngest grandchild, Margaret, named after Margaret Fletcher. She lived to be 97, dying in 1958, and she spent her final years in the old ranch house, surrounded by photographs and mementos of the grandparents she had adored. When asked about them, she would smile and say, "Grandpa Benjamin was the strongest, kindest man I ever knew. He could gentle a wild horse or build a barn or deliver a foal, but his real strength was in how he loved Grandma Rose. And Grandma Rose was the bravest woman I ever knew, not because she faced down danger, though she did, but because she chose love even after everything she had been through. They saved each other, you see. That is what real love does. And that, perhaps, was the truest summary of their story. Benjamin and Rose Quinn had saved each other, and in doing so, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. They had created a home, a family, a legacy of love that would endure for generations. The ranch itself continued to thrive well into the 21st century, a working ranch that also served as a reminder of Arizona's history. Tourists would sometimes stop by, wanting to see the famous Quinn Ranch and hear the story of Benjamin and Rose. The family welcomed them graciously, understanding that the story belonged not just to them, but to everyone who believed in the power of love and courage. In the small museum that was eventually created in part of the old house, visitors could see Rose's wedding dress, carefully preserved, and Benjamin's cavalry rifle, and the letters they had written to each other during the brief period when Benjamin had to travel to Prescott for ranch business. They could see photographs of the couple at different ages, from young and newly married to old and silver-haired but still clearly in love. But the most popular item in the museum was a simple piece of wood, carefully mounted and labeled. It was from the original door of the cabin, the door that Rose had collapsed against all those years ago. On it, burned into the wood in Benjamin's careful script, were the words he had spoken that day. "Your home." Those two simple words summed up everything their love had been. Rose had been searching for home without even knowing it, running from danger but also running towards something she desperately needed. And Benjamin, alone on his ranch, had been needing a home too, needing someone to share his life with, needing purpose and love and connection. They had found it in each other, and they had held on to it through danger and difficulty, through the ordinary trials of life and the extraordinary challenges they had faced. They had built a home together, not just the physical structure but the emotional reality of a place where they were both safe, both loved, both valued. And in the end, that was what everyone wanted, was it not? To find that place, that person, where you could finally stop running and just be. To hear someone say, with absolute certainty, "You're home." Benjamin and Rose Quinn had found that with each other, and their story had become a beacon for everyone who came after them. A reminder that home was not always where you started, but where you ended up when you were brave enough to take a chance on love. Their great-great-great-grandchildren still lived on the ranch, still told the story, still felt the echo of that powerful love that had started everything. And on quiet evenings, when the Arizona sun set in brilliant oranges and reds across the desert sky, it was easy to imagine Benjamin and Rose still there, sitting on the porch they had built together, watching over the family they had created together always, just as they had promised. The story of how Rose collapsed from exhaustion at Benjamin's door, how he carried her inside and gave her not just shelter but a home, a love, a life, had become more than just family history. It had become a testament to the best of what humans could be: brave, kind, loving, and willing to take a chance on a stranger who needed help. And that legacy, that choice Benjamin had made on that hot June day in 1878 to help rather than turn away, had rippled out across time and space, touching hundreds of lives, creating a family that spread across the country, inspiring countless people with the story of their love. That was the real magic of Benjamin and Rose Quinn. Not just that they had found each other, but that in finding each other, they had created something that would last forever. A love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the Wild West, proving that even in the hardest times and places, love could not just survive but flourish. And so the story ended where it began, with a woman collapsing from exhaustion at a cowboy's door, and the cowboy carrying her inside and saying the words that would change both of their lives forever. "You're home." Those words echoed across the decades, a promise kept, a love honored, a legacy that would never fade. Benjamin and Rose Quinn had found their home in each other, and in doing so they had created a home for generations to come.